Hello. I own a restaurant that doesn't have a bin. The popular term for this is zero waste. For me, to be zero waste is to be natural. The current landscape of food in the world today is not so natural. It's industrial. This is why waste exists. Now, I'd like to tell a quick story to explain how I came to this conclusion. 10 years before Silo existed, I was not doing very well in school. I didn't like school. I felt like a chimp in a cage, kicking and screaming. Thankfully, I was let out of that cage, and I found my way to a local kitchen. And I found solitude, though I'm not sure solitude is ever a word that can be described with working in a kitchen. Kitchens are full of anarchy and chaos. But whilst there is this chaos ongoing, there is a sense of freedom. There are rules and there are discipline, but there is a freedom to speak your mind and to become an individual. I personally felt like I'd woken up. So it was the pirate's life for me. I got on the boat and it's taken me all around the world. Unfortunately, through my schooling, I'd developed a failure complex. So when becoming a chef, I decided that I can't just work in a kitchen. I had to work in the best kitchens in the world. The chip on my shoulder demanded it. So I decided that this was what I was going to do, and my motives were questionable. I was going to work at these restaurants for this perhaps superficial reason, but something happened along the way. Something that wasn't planned. I was capturing multiple complementary insights to some of the world's greatest chefs. I had perspective. I'm a really big fan of perspective. Perspective is like a jigsaw puzzle. The more pieces you can attain, pieces being moments, experiences, information, inspiration, the greater the image you can see. Now, when you can see the bigger picture, you can react accordingly. So back to the crusade. I was in Australia at the time, and I was particularly attracted to this one place that was a world best restaurant. It was a Titanic restaurant. That had this appeal of nature. It was natural. The food looked like it had fallen from a tree and onto a plate. Unfortunately, what I learned was it was as far as natural as you can get. I naively went into this kitchen and was working on the protein section. It was my job to cut away 110 pigs' faces from their skulls every day for a garnish, and so I would spend hours and hours and hours for months and months and months carving a pig's head from its skull, and it was a tiresome, loathsome job that, I think has changed something in me. Whether it's the sound of its skull or maybe the smell of the burning hair from its face as I blowtorched it off. And the process of doing this and having this mountain of pig's heads staring at me and then having to bag them up, then cook them in these steam ovens, water constantly flooding into this oven and escaping down the drain for 12 hours in a line, as long as me to that gentleman, constantly, and then the next day coming in with a a chef at 6 a.m. and cutting away these bags into a bin that was definitely not a recycling bin. I didn't think recycling was a concept in that kitchen. It went in the bin, and then we took from the baths of ice, the colossal baths of ice, these pigs' heads and these flabby, gelatinous faces onto a chopping board, and I cut 80% of that head, and then it went straight into a bin. It wasn't for staff food. It wasn't, looked at upon as productive. So it went in the bin. And we then had a lump of pig's head the size of a golf ball for the garnish. Call it a traumatic disposition. Call it a crisis of faith. But something changed within me throughout that process. And I didn't really know what to do with this feeling inside at the time. But defiling thousands and thousands of pig's heads is definitely wrong for these few forgettable moments of gluttony. Thankfully, I happened upon a gentleman who can be described as the zero-waste messiah. He's a 7-foot-tall, beautiful Dutch man with piercing blue eyes and blonde hair, and it was as if he was from the future, a future where everything made more sense, a future where they had everything figured out. And everything that Joost did, his actions, his ideas, made sense. Yet he was considered radical, an anarchist. He had this idea to make a restaurant out of waste materials, and this restaurant was called The Greenhouse. It was a beautiful construct. It was not what you'd imagine. You imagine something from a scrapyard or something, but it was very beautiful. It was carpeted in terracotta pots growing wild strawberry plants all around the exterior, hundreds, maybe even thousands of these little strawberry plants growing on the exterior of the walls. And on the roof was a beautiful, productive garden that had a beehive and a beautiful herb garden. Inside, it goes on. And it was from pig's heads to profit. Something about that contrast was certainly triggered me onto his trajectory. Unfortunately, just to mention, it was Joost's premonition to have a zero-waste restaurant. I didn't have a clue what zero waste meant in those days, but after being dejected from the pig's head kingdom, it sort of made a lot more sense to me. And so I worked with Joost, and we did many different pop-ups projects in Australia, and that's where Silo was born. Unfortunately, it was home time. I had to come home to England for family reasons, though my journey was very exciting and I was keen to stay and to continue what we'd started. Silo had started in Australia until I had to return, and me and Joost are still very good friends and we speak regularly, but with my absence, it didn't make sense to continue this. Now, I happened upon this sexy warehouse door in Brighton on my return to the UK and immediately knew that this was the home for Silo. Now, before I start explaining in finer details what Silo does, I'd like to share a quote which really for me is what Silo is deep down. And it's a quote from Desmond Tutu. And the quote is, Desmond said, he said, "There comes a time where you have to stop pulling people out of the river, only to go upstream and find out why they're jumping in." Silo does not deal with a problem. Silo is a means to prevent that problem from existing. Systemic intervention, stripping the DNA of the problem away. Now I'm going to stop philosophizing and show you how silo works. And I'm hoping this works. So this is the restaurant. It's pretty industrial. It's an oxymoron there. So you have to not have a bin. You have to reverse engineer the supply chain, trading with a source of everything that you need, and then insisting upon all of the things that you do need come in reusable packaging or completely compostable packaging. And then through this initiation, everything is whole. It's when you process food that it begins to be packaged. So everything's whole, which means we have to do everything from scratch. We have to brew all of our drinks. We have to mill our flour. This is quite zoomed in. We have to churn our own butter. We have to roll our own oats. If we want yogurt, we have to make our own yogurt. So it's this sort of caveman cooking. So this finally, I say finally as if there's a lot to it, it's actually so ridiculously simple. This is, you can't really see it, the face of Bertha. Bertha is an aerobic digester. She can compost up to 60 kilos of organic waste every day. Not that we have 5 kilos every day. And basically, this turns all of our food waste very naturally, the process, into compost, which goes back to the land, which grows food. So it's very, very simple. It can literally digest everything that's natural. Before I make this all sound too easy and too fluffy, I just want to be honest about how difficult it is. There's not a week that's passed that I haven't had my head in my hands. It's incredibly challenging. There's Elon Musk always says having an innovative business is like chewing on glass and staring into the abyss, which always tickles me. Progress is messy. We humans were afraid of what we don't understand. When you have something different and you put it out there into the world, it's like putting everything you believe in, all of your ideas, onto the bullseye, only to be shot at again and again and again. I just think it's really important to see both sides of the story. I haven't had an easy ride. We're now 6 years since Silo began in Australia, we're still going strong, but it hasn't been easy. So when you trade with a farmer, when you mill flour and when you churn butter and when you process all these foods yourself, your relationship with the food changes very quickly. Now, it was upon insisting this relationship with the farmer, with saying, we're not going to have this middleman scenario, everything is going to come in its whole form and we're going to work like this, and them reluctantly saying yes to me, I realized something. We had stepped out of the industrial food system, as was a pre-industrial food system. You know the expression, you can't see the wood for the trees? Well, it's like we were in the wood unknowingly, and we'd left the wood, and I'd turned around only to see the woods were on fire. There's a name for people who oppose industrial progress, a Luddite. I don't consider myself a Luddite, though I do think it's very, very important to highlight the importance of food being alive. We're alive, this planet's alive, and it doesn't make sense to process food so it's not alive. Industrialism, like capitalism, is a brilliant idea fundamentally, but when greed enters the equation, the system fails. If the agenda for industrialism was to naturally, organically feed the world efficiently, I wouldn't be talking about this right now. Unfortunately, the agenda is convenience and choice. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, this is the bigger picture. This is the trees burning. Industrial food makes us ill, furthermore, makes the planet ill. It detaches us from food. It detaches us from nature, rendering food a commodity, becomes expendable. Like I said in the beginning, this is why waste exists. I have a theory of hacking perspective. Again, I'm a big fan of perspective. It's actually very easy. You have to force your brain to see things differently. Not having a bin is a way of making your brain see things differently. Limitation has turned Silo into a creative powerhouse. Limitation lights up the darker parts of your brain. This is a plate made out of waste plastic bags. You can see a waste plastic bag and think, it's done. It's absolutely valueless. Or you can shift your perspective and you can see manipulating it into a form, into a function, into something which is beautiful. This is my favorite villain. This, not the forager, but the Japanese knotweed he's holding. I'm told that I read off the internet, Japanese knotweed is one of the world's most invasive plant species. If you look at it like this terrorist, then it will always be a terrorist. But if you look at it as a rhubarb, bamboo-esque, beautiful, delicate, juicy, fresh, tender stem, then you start to see food. This is some canapes that I did with young, tender shoots of Japanese knotweed, and it was stuffed with a raw sheep's cheese mousse and some wild garlic pesto, and it was so beautiful. With the thinner stems of the Japanese knotweed, we made straws. And then there was a lot of trimmings, which we pickle brined, kind of like an olive. And in this pickled brined knotweed, we stared at it and thought, what is this good for? And it was the waste of something which is beyond waste. And we said, well, it's kind of like an olive. It even has that sort of that hollow center. And we said, what would you do with an olive? We obviously don't have olives at Silo. I was like, let's do a martini. So the world's most invasive martini. So the final example, one very delirious day, and it was 3 a.m, God knows what time, and I was staring into the compost, as one does at Silo. And I happened to be cradling a bunch of carrots, and I was wondering how this compost could have this intense aroma of citrus. thinking it's just compost. It just looks like compost. Why does it smell of citrus? Only did I discover that the brewers had deposited 100 kilos of lemony compost waste, which they had intercepted from going to landfill, made a phenomenal amount of delicious lemon drinks, and then put it into Bertha as scattered lemon waste. And I was thinking to myself, I should bake these carrots in this compost, because that makes sense. It's a very classic salt baking technique. And as profound as this situation, this scenario was, it resulted in, so this worked so well, we actually strategically did it again. And I said to the brewers, does this happen often? They was like, well, sort of, yeah. So we strategically timed this whole process once again, and this was for the Wasted pop-up. We've mentioned Dan Barber a few times today, in London earlier this year, and I was asked to come and do a dish, and knowing the grandiose kind of scale of this pop-up with all these chefs, but my history with waste, I thought, I need to come to town with the big guns, the big concepts. And it was at this point where I thought, this is the idea, this is the one. So we strategically took 100 kilos of lemon waste, put it into Bertha's belly. 48 hours later, cooked the carrots in the lemony compost, and without any exaggeration, this was the best carrot I've ever eaten in my whole entire life. It was sweet and rich, and due to this kind of vacuum sealing technique of salt baking, it was chewy and just rich. But it had this overwhelming purity, this clarity of the flavor of lemon. And it was just like totally mind-boggling, this process. And that was just the carrots. It's kind of like the film Inception, where there's different layers and layers, and the further you go down, it becomes more and more confusing. It was a dish like that. And this was the dish, this not the exact dish, but this was the dish that I did at Dan Barber's Wasted pop-up, which he described as mind-boggling and mind-blowing, which was certainly the high point of my career. Now, I'm not saying that carrots cooked in lemony compost is the answer to life's problems, though I am suggesting that if we shift our perspective, we might find some of those answers. If you look at a problem like waste too closely, then you won't see, or you'll see as confusion. But when you step back and look at the bigger picture, you'll start to see some of those solutions. We have designed waste into this world, and I believe that we can design it out again. Thank you.